The economic freedom fighters are planning to march to the French embassy in Pretoria tomorrow to call on the country or call for the country's withdrawal from the African continent. The EFF says it's the ultimate goal to get France or get one continent with one currency. That's where Africa is concerned, one president and a unitary African parliament. Let's talk about the presence of the French then on the African continent with Advocate Sipho Mantula. Advocate Mantula, always good to have you on Newzroom Afrika. Welcome. So is the role of the French on the continent, especially in their former colonies, a fundamentally toxic one?
Tembekile, Jambo Africa, good afternoon to your viewers. Indeed, you can say it's toxic, but also it is so problematic in the sense that the French foreign policy cannot survive or sustain itself without Africa. And I will take you back. I will take you back to 2017 when the newly elected, once again, the young man, Emmanuel Macron, when he was in Ouagadougou in 2017, how he revived that relations. That dates back to 1973, when the France and the Africa Summit started, and that's where the French influence on the summit. The second toxic one being military. Me and you have been engaging on the France presence in the Sahel region. And the third one being economic, when we talk about your currencies, your Congo francs, West Africa still using the CFA franc, which means we are still colonized by the French monetarily. And finally, Tembekile, what I always call the cultural assimilation, the cultural selling out of Africa with this so-called French diplomacy. And even lately, we see them awarding media personalities awards in Africa. So you become worried about why this toxic relation of France, because France has been very critical. Their foreign policy, like I've said earlier, it's all about exploiting Africa.
So just on that, I want to delve deeper into the issue of exploitation, right? You mentioned the example of the Sahel region. The countries there would rely on the French for military and financial assistance in some of these cases. But for the French, why can the French not exist without having their hand on that part of Africa and the broader former French colonies?
You know, Tembekile, the effects and the remnants of Berlin Conference of technocrats, politicians, and the role that Mitterrand played when he said, France without Africa is no France. So I want to go back to the youth again. You look at the youth, you look at the military exercise that we have mentioned, from Operation Barkhane that they were involved in the Sahel. We see the French as well in the islands. Having visited Madagascar self, you know, Tembekile, I've seen their presence even in the islands. And then when you talk about their appetite, you said toxic earlier, I will say their appetite on Africa will never cease. There will forever be appetite in Africa. They are offering our young people dual citizenship. They are offering them scholarship. They teach them the French language. Our own diplomats in Africa, they parle français. When you talk to them, they make it less, and when they speak French, it's like they are in heaven. That's how it's problematic. When I said, even the language, Tembekile, look at our passport in South Africa. I don't know whether you've given yourself time to look at your passport. It's got 3 languages. It's English, Afrikaans, and French. So they still even colonize our movements.
So the EFF plans to march tomorrow to the French embassy. Yes, that will not then 2 hours later be met by an announcement by the French to say we are withdrawing from all involvement from Africa. But how much impact can that have, also given that it's a march that's happening so far away from where the French are so involved?
Definitely, I don't think so. The march, I think it's a pressure point of commemorating Africa Day to show the so-called Francophone appetite that they've been having. They won't, you know, they won't move out of Africa. Hence, they come under the EU. They come under the UN. Remember, France is part of the UN system. It's part of the EU system. It's aiding and abetting African Union programs. So there's no way you can flash away or deal away with the French influence or this appetite that is so growing every time. So the march for me, I see it as a sign that Tembekile, me and you again, I will go back. When we've been analyzing France in Guinea-Conakry, France in Mali, we saw civilians and ordinary people marching against France, not against military leaders. You look at summit that is coming to Malabo on Friday, one of the questions that will come out is that who are the instigators of these military coups? I can assure you France is one of the suspects. The killing of Thomas Sankara in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. France at the later stage said we can share the military files. So some of us, we look at France with a suspicion, and sometimes we don't take everything. Macron came in this country, engaged with our president. They went on France-Africa Summit last year, convincing the youth of Africa to understand the new role of France. But I think France has not done enough for the continent, and I think the march of the economic freedom fighter is part of their international relations presence in our discourse on global politics.
So does the political elite, though, in these countries actually want the French to leave, or does the personal benefit that they may perhaps draw from Paris outweigh any sort of discontent among the ordinary population? I mean, you've got Mali now, there's been major fallout then that's going to now ultimately see French troops being withdrawn after years on the ground. But do the political elites in Africa want the French to break ties?
You know, partly some of them, they said it's so theoretically, rhetorically, but some of them, they've benefited from even their schools, they benefited from their so-called the dual visa that I was saying to you earlier. But the elites, they don't have chance anymore. The pressure is coming from civilians. Hence, I was saying to you earlier, the French media outlets, even in Mali, they've been flushed out. The issues even around following this French issues around the money. Why is our eco has been delayed? It is because we are still borrowing money from the French. Our own currency in Africa cannot be managed because France is still holding our own reserves. So some of the elites, if I can be honest with you, they still love Paris. They still like to go to their former colonizer, be sanitized by him with their knowledge. And that's why we have a problem. But I think ordinary people, civilians, academics, we are still trying to understand the Africa-France Summit of 2021 that happened.
Right.
We're still trying to dissect the Ouagadougou meeting that I told you earlier of 2017, when France was saying we are trying to renew our relation. We know it was not a good one. Look at the question of Rwanda genocide, how the French were involved in the UN peacekeeping mission. So can we just forget and not forgive? We have to look at both sides.
Say the French leave, which, as you said, is highly unlikely. Say the French leave, who then closes the financial and military gap that would leave in the countries where they are present? And B, the goal of a united Africa for all, that basically, even where borders exist, they basically are not a deterrent between the two countries and people moving about. How realistic, how attainable is that goal when you consider that African populations, as we've seen post-pandemic, yes, the pandemic is still with us, but many of these populations have become poorer. The battle for economic resources is more ferocious than ever. So can it still happen?
Africa can still survive without France. I want to go back again. The French foreign policy can still exist without Africa on two bases. And those two bases are informed by that. It goes back to the ideal of our African founding fathers and founding mothers as we are on the eve of Africa Liberation Day, that we need our own Africa standby force. We need our own Africa currency. And that's where I think we are drifting and gravitating towards. Hence, we have Africa free trade. And hence, I find that the French colonial impact and legacy in Africa has to be unmasked, has to be unbundled, has to be interrupted, disrupted, and be told directly that your time has ended, because what we have done, we have caused a severe damage. And like I said to you, Tembeki, even if they leave tomorrow, we will still survive. I think our problem is that our allegiance to the continent has faded because we thought their euros, their pounds, their dollars create Africa. Africa doesn't rely on their money and their donor funding. I don't think Africa must rely on that. I think Africa must stand on its own, and hence we find that even these conflicts, Tembekile, they're all about natural resources. It has been our anthem, me and you, when we talk about the Sahel, that the conflicts in Africa is not all about having of military power. It's all about natural resources and the recolonization of African cultures, African ways of life.
Advocate Sipho Mantula, thank you very much for being on the program today.